3 envelopes sat on the dining room table, each one labeled in Leonard's careful handwriting. Morris, Chester Dexter. Aubrey had left Halifax at 6 in the morning, driven 4 hours down the 103 through fog and drizzle, and her name was not on a single one. She already knew. She'd known since her father called 2 weeks earlier with that flat, measured voice he used when a decision had already been made. Come home Sunday. We're settling the property while we still can. She had told Martin before she left, my brothers are getting everything. He'd said, maybe not everything. She'd said nothing and packed her bag. The family home had stood at the end of Creighton Road in Bridgewater for 38 years. Leonard had built the hardware supply business from a single rented storefront into a proper operation with a warehouse on the edge of town and a second commercial lot near the highway. He was 72 and had been talking about retirement for 4 years without actually taking a single day off. Dolores kept the accounts, the garden, and her opinions mostly to herself. Morris sat nearest their father. He was 44 and had worked in the store since he was 16, which he mentioned at least once in every family gathering. Chester, 40, was in sales of some kind that required frequent travel and vague explanations. Dexter, 38, had a piece of lakeside camp property out near Lunenburg and spent his summers there, doing things no one had ever quite pinned down. Leonard spread the contents of the first envelope across the table without ceremony. The family home went to Morris, along with the hardware store, the warehouse behind it, and the rights to the business name. Morris nodded and began studying the property map before their father had finished talking. The second envelope, the commercial lot near the highway, went to Chester, along with the share of the business Leonard had been holding separately for years. Chester asked about the access road. Their father said it was included. The third, Dexter received 23 acres out in Lunenburg County, the old lakeside camp, the dock, and a seasonal rental cabin that brought in some income over the summer. Dexter leaned back and smiled. Leonard set down the last folder. The room went quiet in the particular way it does when everyone knows something hasn't been said yet. Aubrey asked, "And my share, Dad?" Her father's answer came without hesitation, which was almost worse. "You have your own house in Halifax, your own business. Martin has steady work. The property should stay with your brothers. They're the ones who've been here." Her mother looked at the table. Aubrey waited a moment, then said, "I was here too, for the first 23 years. That's different." "How?" Leonard tapped the stack of papers. "You're married. Whatever I give you goes into your husband's household. It wouldn't stay in the family." She didn't argue. She had known the answer before she asked the question. There was a form at the bottom of the stack with her name typed at the top, the only place her name appeared. Acknowledging that she had been informed of the transfers and would not contest them, she picked up the pen and signed in even unhurried handwriting, folded her copy, put it in her bag. Then her father said, "We'll start moving to Halifax next month." Aubrey set her bag down. "What?" "The house will be too busy once Morris gets the store renovation going. It makes more sense for us to be in the city, near the hospitals." She looked at her oldest brother. Morris looked at the property map. "Morris has the house and the business," she said. "Why can't you stay there?" Morris's wife answered before he could. The renovation would take months, dust everywhere. Too much noise for 2 elderly people. Chester said he was on the road 3 weeks out of 4. Dexter said the camp was fine in summer, but not properly heated for winter. And then her father said it, the second half of the arrangement that had clearly been decided before she arrived. "You're the daughter, Aubrey. You know how to run a home. We'd be more comfortable with you." She looked at the 3 envelopes on the table. 20 minutes ago, being married meant she had no share of her parents' property. Now it apparently meant she should be the one to take in 2 people who needed daily care, medical appointments, and a bedroom that wasn't already full. "How much will each of you contribute each month?" she said. "Morris, Chester, Dexter, what's your number?" No one answered. "If Dad needs to go to the hospital, who takes the day shift? Who takes the night? Which one of you is driving down from Bridgewater?" Morris said they would figure it out when the time came. "You want every boundary written on a survey map for the property," Aubrey said. "But when it comes to looking after them, we'll figure it out." Leonard's voice rose. "They're your parents, not a business contract." "They are," she said. "And I'm one of 4 children. I won't be taking both of you to Halifax while my 3 brothers stay here with everything you own." She picked up her bag. "I'll do my share, 1/4, clearly and in writing. but I will not do all 4 parts and call it family duty. She walked to the door, and as she reached the front step, she could already hear Morris and Chester arguing about the access road on the highway lot, as if the question of where their parents would sleep had already been filed away. The drive back to Halifax felt longer than 4 hours. Martin had dinner ready when she got home. He listened to everything, then said carefully that maybe they should think about it, just temporarily until things settled. Aubrey looked at him. Who takes Mom to her cardiologist if she's in our house? You? Because my brothers are 40 minutes from Bridgewater and have nothing but time and property. Martin didn't bring it up again that night. Within 3 weeks, Dolores and Leonard had moved into the spare room at Morris's house. Within 6 weeks, Aubrey's old neighbor Claudette called to say she'd run into Leonard at the pharmacy. He'd looked tired, said they'd been asked to use the back bedroom because the front rooms were being opened up for stored display space. Aubrey called her mother. Dolores said it was fine, it was only temporary, the back room had a window. She called Morris. Morris said their parents were comfortable and that Aubrey should mind her own household. In November, a cold front came down through Nova Scotia faster than the forecast predicted. Dexter had invited their parents to the lakeside camp for a long weekend. The cabin was not insulated for temperatures that dropped below zero. The propane heater was old and inadequate. Dolores slipped on a patch of ice near the cabin door and came down hard on her right wrist. Dexter was inside with his earbuds in. By the time he heard her calling, she had been on the ground for several minutes in the cold. Claudette heard through a cousin who heard through a neighbor. That was how Aubrey's family communicated, in concentric circles that reached her last. She drove to Lunenburg the next morning. The camp was beautiful, in a way that was completely useless to an elderly woman with a probable fracture and blood pressure that hadn't been monitored in 5 weeks. Dolores sat at the kitchen table with her wrist wrapped in a dish towel. Leonard sat across from her and said nothing when Aubrey walked in. Dexter met her at the door. She's fine. It's probably just bruised. Aubrey took her mother to the clinic in town. The wrist was sprained, not broken, but Dolores's blood pressure was high enough that the doctor asked pointed questions about her medication schedule. She had missed 2 refills. Aubrey paid for the appointment and the prescription. She photographed every receipt. Then she added Morris, Chester, and Dexter to a group message and sent the photos with a single line. I've covered Mom's appointment and medication. This is my portion. The 3 of you need to decide where they're living before winter. Morris read it and didn't reply. Chester sent a thumbs up. Dexter called privately and said he felt terrible, but the camp really wasn't set up for 2 people long term. A week later, an ice storm cut the power at the camp for 30 hours. Leonard called Aubrey at 11 at night, voice quiet in the way that meant he was frightened but wouldn't say so. She arranged a cab to collect them, found a 2-bedroom apartment near the medical clinic in Bridgewater, paid the damage deposit, and by the following evening her parents were out of the camp. They were renting a room because their sons had the property. That sentence sat in Aubrey's chest for days, quiet and immovable. After her parents moved into the apartment, Morris posted something on Facebook. He didn't name her. He wrote about children who forgot their obligations once they got comfortable in the city, about how the older generation deserved better. Cousins left comments. An aunt called on a Tuesday afternoon to say it was a shame that with a nice house in Halifax, Aubrey couldn't find room for her own parents. Aubrey asked, "Have you called Morris?" The aunt said the men had businesses to run. Aubrey said goodbye and ended the call. Martin came home that night to find her at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet open. He looked at it, pulled up a chair, and said he had been wrong before. Not wrong to want peace, but wrong to think peace was possible if it only ever came from one direction. He said, "I think I understand now what you're afraid of." She said, "Tell me." He said, "That once you pay the first bill, they'll assume you're paying all of them." She nodded. He put his hand over hers and didn't say anything else for a long time. In February, Dolores had a stroke. Leonard found her on the bedroom floor at 5:30 in the morning, trying to reach her phone. He called Morris first, then Aubrey. She drove through a February morning, still dark at 8 a.m., ice on the bridges outside Truro, and arrived at the Bridgewater hospital to find her 3 brothers in the hallway. Morris held out a clipboard the moment she walked through the door. "They need the insurance information completed. You should do it. You know where everything is." Before she could respond, Chester said they'd left in a hurry and hadn't brought enough cash for the initial fees. Dexter looked at his shoes. She heard Morris say in a low voice to Chester, "She'll handle it, she always does." Aubrey took the clipboard. She completed the forms, paid the fees, kept every receipt. Then she reached into her bag and laid 4 printed sheets on the row of waiting chairs. She had made them before leaving Halifax, sitting at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning with the printer running in the hallway. Each sheet had 4 sections: name, scheduled days, financial contribution, emergency rotation. Morris looked at the papers. "You brought a schedule to the hospital." "The more urgent the situation," Aubrey said, "the clearer it needs to be." Chester said they were family, not a corporation. Aubrey looked at him steadily. "When Dad divided the property, you wanted the lot lines measured to the meter and the access road written into the deed. This is the same thing. One column is what each person received. The other is what each person owes." Dexter was the first to reach for the pen. He took 2 shifts a week and said he'd handle transport to follow-up appointments. His voice was quieter than usual. He didn't make excuses. Chester agreed to a monthly contribution and 2 weekend visits. He signed without meeting anyone's eyes. Morris was last. He read the sheet twice and signed hard enough that the pen left marks through to the copy underneath. He chose Sunday evenings and noted that as the oldest, he had the most responsibilities. Aubrey wrote his name in the Sunday column and said nothing about the property. She took the first night shift herself. At 2 in the morning, Dolores opened her eyes and turned her head slowly toward where Aubrey was sitting. The left side of her face was uneven. Her right hand moved a few centimeters toward the edge of the bed. Aubrey reached over and took it. She couldn't remember the last time her mother had reached for her first. There had been a period when Aubrey was a teenager, bringing some small thing to show her, a project, a drawing, a grade she was proud of, and Dolores would look at it briefly and say, "That's nice, dear," and return to whatever she was doing. There had always been something more pressing. 3 boys in a hardware store and a town that had a certain idea of how a family ought to run. Aubrey sat with her mother's hand in hers until the shift change at 7. Leonard had barely spoken since the ambulance came. He sat on the other side of the bed with his hands on his knees. Near morning, Aubrey asked him what time he had found her. "About 20 past 5. "Did she say anything before the ambulance came?" He was quiet for a moment. "She said your name." Aubrey turned toward her mother and didn't ask anything else. The care schedule held better than she had expected. Dexter was the most consistent. He drove from Lunenburg on his assigned days, learned to read the medication chart, and left notes for whoever came next, written on the back of prescription slips. When something unavoidable came up, he arranged the switch himself and updated the group message in advance. Morris came for his Sunday shifts but routinely left before they ended. A delivery, a supplier, a customer. Every early departure was documented on the chart Aubrey kept. Chester transferred his contribution on time twice, then a week late, then asked to defer a month for cash flow reasons. Aubrey covered the difference and wrote it in the group chat. Chester paid in the following month, without acknowledgement. Martin drove down on the days Aubrey couldn't leave the workshop. He never allowed his time to be counted as hers, and she never let anyone suggest that it should be. One afternoon at the hospital, Aubrey came around the corner near the family lounge and caught the end of what Chester was saying to Morris. "Just let her take the lead on the payments. She won't let them go without." Morris said something about eventually hiring a caregiver, that Aubrey was doing well enough to carry more than her share. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she walked over and asked Morris, in a level voice, how the hardware store was running. He said that was his business. She said, "You're right. Mom's care is everyone's." She went back to the physiotherapy room. That evening, Martin told her he had gone back to the lounge and said it plainly to both of them. "While you're waiting for Aubrey to pay first, your mother is down the hall." Morris had called it dramatic. Martin had said he planned to keep saying it every time she was in another room. Aubrey didn't speak for a moment, then she said, "Thank you." When Dolores was well enough to be discharged, Aubrey had already found the next arrangement. A ground floor apartment 2 blocks from the medical clinic, level floors, wide doorways, a bathroom where the landlord agreed to let them install a grab bar at no extra charge. Aubrey signed a 6-month lease and transferred exactly 1/4 of the damage deposit, asking the landlord to send separate payment requests to Morris, Chester, and Dexter for their portions. She hired a part-time caregiver named Marta, a woman in her 50s who had looked after her own husband after a stroke and knew precisely how to help someone relearn the ordinary motions of a day. Marta's monthly pay went direct deposit. Aubrey did not collect cash from anyone on her brother's behalf. At the family meeting where she laid out the plan, Leonard sat at the end of the table and said almost nothing. When Morris complained about the cost and said family should care for family without bringing in outsiders, Aubrey said, "Which of the four of us can be there every morning?" No one answered. She said, "That's why Marta is there." Leonard looked at his three sons in turn. He asked Morris directly, "Will you take your mother home?" Morris said the renovation. He asked Chester, "Can you care for her yourself?" Chester said his schedule. He asked Dexter, "Will you take her out to the camp?" Dexter said it wasn't suitable, not now. Leonard stared at the three property envelopes, which had reappeared on the table without anyone saying why, and was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed the expense sheet toward the center of the table. "Sign it," he said. His voice had gone rough. "I thought giving the property to my three sons meant I would be looked after. I was wrong." It was the first time Aubrey had heard her father use that word about one of his own decisions. He did not turn to apologize to her. He only sat still and waited while his sons signed. What surprised her, weeks later, was finding the shoebox. She drove up to the lakeside camp in April to collect the last of her parents' belongings. The camp was quiet, the lake still half frozen, and the inside of the cabins smelled of wood smoke and old propane. Most of what remained was practical. Extra blankets, a toolbox, her father's weathered rain jacket. But on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, behind a stack of board games, she found a shoebox sealed with a strip of masking tape. Inside, a folded Halifax Chronicle-Herald article from 8 years earlier, the one they'd run when her workshop won a regional small business award. A photograph from a community event. Aubrey at 26, standing beside the first full cabinet she had ever built for a paying customer. Smiling in a way she barely recognized anymore. Several makers' labels from the years before she redesigned the business branding, cut neatly and bundled together. And at the bottom, a letter in her mother's handwriting, addressed to no one, never sent. "I know I didn't say it. I know I should have said it when you were young and it would have meant something. I watched you figure it out on your own with no help from us, and I couldn't find the words. I was proud from the very beginning. I was afraid of your father. I'm sorry those two things lived in the same place for so long." Aubrey sat on the edge of the camp bed and read it twice. She folded it and put it back. She brought the box to the apartment. She waited until Marta had left for the evening, and Leonard had gone to lie down. She sat beside her mother's chair and set the box on the table between them. Dolores could manage short words reliably now. Longer sentences still came in fragments, arriving with effort and pauses that were not hesitation but distance. She looked at the box and then at Aubrey. "You kept all of these," Aubrey said. Her mother's right hand moved toward the box. "Kept them, always." "Why didn't you tell me?" "It took several attempts." "Afraid," Dolores finally said. "Your father." Then, after a long moment, "I was wrong." It was not an apology that repaired anything. The property had still gone to her brothers. The years of being called only when someone needed something. Those years were still exactly what they had been. The silence when Aubrey needed to hear something said was still silence. But it was the first time her mother had said it aloud, and Aubrey heard it clearly. She reached over and straightened the blanket on her mother's lap. "I know," she said. They sat together until Dolores fell asleep. Dolores was gone in October. The funeral was held at the church in Bridgewater where her parents had been married. After the service, near the entrance, two cousins spoke in voices not quite quiet enough. Something about Dolores spending her last months in a rented apartment, something about daughters who might have done more. Dexter walked over to them. He was not loud about it. He said, "Aubrey found the apartment, hired the caregiver, organized every medication schedule, drove back and forth every single week, and made sure none of us could quietly disappear." He said, "She didn't fail our mother. She made it impossible for the rest of us to fail her." Then he walked back to where Aubrey was standing and said nothing else. She looked at her brother. "That's enough," she said quietly. "Leave it." He left it. 6 months after the funeral, Morris's situation at the hardware store had become complicated in a way that had a certain private symmetry to it. His adult son had taken over more of the floor space for a new product line, and there had been conversations, careful, courteous conversations with a hard edge, about which rooms the previous generation should use. Morris had stood in the doorway of the room beside the stockroom one morning, looking at the low light and the shelf marks on the wall, and said nothing for a long time. Chester came to Aubrey's workshop on a Thursday in February. He sat in her office with both hands around a coffee cup and explained that the highway lot deal had collapsed. A survey issue, a lender who'd pulled back. He owed money he didn't have. He was wondering if she could. And here he paused in a way that showed more self-awareness than he usually managed. If she might be able to bridge the gap. She poured herself a coffee and sat down across from him. "I can't use money I need for payroll and materials," she said. Chester nodded slowly. He didn't tell her she owed him anything. He didn't mention their parents, or what had been given and not given. He stood and left, and she watched him drive out of the parking lot without feeling any particular satisfaction. She only felt tired in the way that comes from doing the right thing without anyone watching. Leonard came to Halifax in the spring for a checkup at a clinic Martin had arranged. After the appointment, he walked through the workshop with the unhurried attention of a man who had spent his life in a building supply business. He examined the finishing station, the custom order wall, the framing jig Aubrey had made herself. He stopped near the front of the shop. On the wall beside the office entrance was a framed print, the Halifax Chronicle-Herald article, the one about the regional award, matted and set in simple dark wood. She had put it up only 6 months ago, after 30 years of keeping that kind of thing in a drawer. Leonard looked at it for a long time. "Why is it so small?" "It's the original size of the article. It should be bigger." He looked around the shop. "It should be the first thing people see when they come in." "It's fine where it is, Dad." He went to her tool bench without asking, and came back with a finish nail and a hammer. He took the frame down, measured with his eye, found the center of the wall directly opposite the entrance, and drove the nail himself. He adjusted it twice. When he rehung the frame, it was where anyone walking through the door would see it first. He stepped back and looked at it. Then he set the hammer down on the nearest workbench and didn't say anything else. Aubrey stood beside him and didn't move the frame. After he left with Dexter, she stood in the empty shop at the end of the day. The overhead lights cast an even wash across the floor. Her name was in the headline on the wall. Her work was framed at the center of the business she had built, from a second-hand table saw and a rented garage, with no help from anyone who should have helped her. She went to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. The shoebox was there, and inside it, the letter her mother had written and never sent until after she was gone. She didn't take it out to frame it. She didn't need to display her own wound to prove it had been real. The business on the wall was proof enough, not of what had been done to her, but of what she had done anyway. She closed the drawer and locked it. She turned off the lights in order. Finishing station, cutting floor, front display. Then she walked out into the parking lot where Martin was waiting with the engine running and the heat already on. Her name was still visible through the front window as she pulled the door shut behind her. In her workshop, no daughter's talent would ever be packed into a box and kept in a closet, because saying it aloud felt too dangerous. That much at least, she had made certain of. She got in the car, they drove home.